Everyone, welcome to our ICF Life Vision and Enhancement Community of Practice session. Today we have Colleen, and my name is Abhirambika Ravivarman. I'm from India. I am a life coach. I also do leadership coaching. So I'm excited to host this session along with Key. Key, say hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Key Voika. I'm joining from California this morning, well, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have you. I'm a mental health coach and a group and team facilitator. And this is my first year with Abhi and as a co-leader for the ICF Life Vision and Enhancement Community of Practice. And it's my second webinar, and I'm excited.
Thank you, Key. So for all of you who are joining us, I would want you to put down, from where you are and at least a one word that comes to your mind about what you're going to experience today. What brings you here for this webinar today? Because we have an amazing speaker with us whom we are going to introduce in a very short while. So just tell us what's coming up in your mind at this point.
Hi, Susan from Canada, and Steph in Toronto. Eileen, Marion in London, Ontario. Great, nice. New Jersey, Montreal. Oh my goodness, it's going so fast. Steve from Taiwan. Wonderful. Ooh, okay, Ontario is here. Beautiful. Chicago.
Explain why coaching works for people. That's what to understand what's happening in the brain. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Looking forward to learning.
Keen to build community with others.
Okay, we have someone from India, Hyderabad.
Yeah. And is everyone aware we're recording the webinar? And it will be up in 48 hours. If you're not able to fully focus,
yes,
you can always catch the recording again.
Curious, okay. So we'll probably just go with what we have. We'll just start and then people can keep joining. I'm going to be doing certain slides on the ICF right now. So in ICF, there is this amazing space of, on-demand offering that ICF gives. So it's very popular. So each series go on their own pace. Business development series is there. So as coaches, all of us look forward to developing our business. So do check this out. There are links available in ICF website in the events page. So do check this out. It will be extremely useful to all of you. And then for the CCUs, the new process that's being held right now is for you to log into the ICF, education portal, and then launch this webinar, and then put the learning checkpoints. You will be asked 3 or 5 questions based on what is happening today in the session, what Colleen will be sharing. And then once you score 100%, you would be able to claim your CCUs. So that's the thing. So stay with us for the whole session and just enjoy the session. And then, yes, Colleen, I'm going to give it to Key for her to introduce you. I am so happy that we are doing this session. It's a most interesting topic. Personally, for me, neuroscience has been a great learning for my coaching journey. I have seen my coaching shape differently as I did my neuroscience. So very, very excited to have you with us, Colleen. So Key, over to you to introduce Colleen for us.
I do want to also give a quick shout out and thank yous. You, Abhi, are amazing. Abhi Rambika Ravivarman is my partner in this and co-leader. And thank you for creating another eye-catching poster and for being just a wonderful collaborator and support in this community of practice. I also want to give a big shout out to the education team. Ashley Pak, the education experience manager, and with us today are Sarah Watts, who is brand new with us as the education technology coordinator, and Katie Hamlin, the education coordinator, who was with us in Q1. We are so grateful for your support and all that you do for us. It's just wonderful to have you, and you're all highly skilled, and I'm so grateful for your helpfulness and support throughout our work together. together. Now, Dr. Colleen Lightbody, I first saw our speaker, Dr. Colleen, earlier this year in a webinar for the UK ICF Charter in a fantastic mini-series on neuroscience. And her vibrant delivery on the neuroscience of coaching habits and addiction, her obvious passion for what our brains can do and how we can apply neuroscientific findings in our coaching made me immediately want to introduce her to you all here at the Life Vision and Enhancement Community of Practice. She is the founder and managing director of BrainWise, Mastery Through Neuroscience. Colleen is an internationally respected, experienced, and extremely bold coach, trainer, and speaker. She has inspired people in over 20 countries across the globe with her trainings and her speaking and her coaching. She is also known as the brain guru through her writing. And Colleen is a remarkable scholar with a PhD in mindfulness and leadership, a master's degree in leadership, honors in clinical psychology, and postgraduate diplomas in coaching and neuroleadership, addiction, trauma, grief, and crisis counseling. With over 15,000 hours of training and coaching, you would think there is little time left for something else or anything else. But Colleen finds the time and she has the neuroplasticity to get it all done. She's an avid cyclist, riding her bike almost daily, finishing hundreds of ultra distance events and races, as well as 3 full Ironman challenges. She's climbed Kilimanjaro and Everest Base Camp. Her 2 children call her the Lioness Mom. Her personal story is nothing short of amazing, and I encourage all of you to look up Colleen's TEDx talks where she earned standing ovations. Colleen, it's such an honor to have you. Thank you so much for doing this webinar with the ICF Life Vision and Enhancement Community of Practice, and the floor is yours.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. What a lovely introduction.
Beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. I'm just saying it's amazing to have you, Colleen. Just after hearing what he says, it's like we are so excited.
I feel like I should have invited my mother because she should be hearing that. She'll go, no, that's not you.
You can send her the recording.
I think I'm going to have to, definitely. Thank you. Good. So welcome everybody to this presentation. A subject I'm very passionate about, which is obviously I'm passionate about coaching, I'm passionate about learning, but the brain particularly is what drives me. So just to get us going, let me explain to you, break the news about why I came up with the title of Coaching, Learning, and the Brain on platform 9 3/4. So firstly, the brain. So I think the brain obviously is really relevant to coaching at the moment. Many coaches are fascinated by the neuroscience behind coaching. I saw somebody was asking in the chat, and please put questions in the chat as we go. I'm very happy to make this interactive. Katie's going to help me manage the chat. So if you've got questions as we go along, please do that. And at times I'm going to stop and ask you to add things in the chat. Anyway, so I saw somebody earlier was going about how do we help our clients understand their brain and how do we use the neuroscience in order to be better coaches. And it's not necessarily that we're teaching neuroscience to our clients, because that's not coaching, that's teaching. However, I think it really empowers us as coaches to understand how does our brain work, and we understand how our clients' brains work so that we can facilitate them in the best way possible. Obviously, there's certain times when we're giving them a little bit of information or some support or some reading about effective use of the brain. And I think today you'll especially see how can we really leverage the brain so much better in order to learn. So what is learning? It's a process. It's a process of acquiring knowledge, understanding, skills, attitudes, preferences. It's a process of acquiring. And what is coaching? The definition of coaching, according to the ICF, is about partnering in a thought-provoking and creative process in order to maximize potential. And in order to maximize somebody's potential, they're going to have to change. They're going to have to learn. And that's why, for me, the two words are completely synonymous. Something fun that Abby Key and I discovered right when we were coming up with the idea for this program was that learning is actually mentioned 9 times. So you're starting to get a hint of the platform 9 3/4. It's actually mentioned 9 times in the competencies. So I'm not going to go through the competencies. We'll probably refer to them as we go along. But learning is a absolutely key ingredient of our coaching process. And why platform 9 3/4? So the 2 people helping us from a technical perspective today, Sarah and Katie, were telling me as we got onto the webinar this evening how fascinated they were by Harry Potter and how excited they were about the title because they were so attached to their Harry Potter books, having read them all. So here's my confession, Sarah and Katie, is I've never read a Harry Potter book, I'm afraid to say. Part of the reason I came up with the title was because of the 9, which was mentioned in learning, being mentioned 9 times in the competencies. The other reason is because I'm quite newly married and my husband's 2 daughters are Harry Potter obsessed. So I thought of just leverage this as an opportunity to impress my husband's daughters. And then also because, and I've got written there tip number 1, that if something is unusual, if something is evocative, if something is provocative, we pay attention to it and we're far more likely to learn it. And so therefore I thought it was a somewhat provocative and evocative title. Why I've written tip number 1 there is I'm not going to do a presentation with a whole lot of bullet points, bullet point, bullet point, bullet points. I haven't typed out my presentation, but it's going to be interactive. And as we go along, I'm going to throw out some tips, throw out some ideas. You might come up with some yourselves. So the tip number 1 is to create novelty. Okay, so novelty is how we grab a person's attention. We don't want our coaching to be boring and unexciting. When something is unusual, when something is provocative, it draws our brain to it. So that's tip number 1. My suggestion to you is that you gather these tips, and we can kind of see at the end of this, how many tips did you come up to at the end of the session, which kind of leads me to tip number 2, which is write it down. If we don't write something down, it's highly unlikely that we're going to do anything with the information. As fascinating as I intend to be over the next hour and a half, you will remember less than 10% of what I've said in a couple of months' time. So tip number 2 is when you want to learn something, write it down, which is, again, I know I'm 55 years old, so for me, it's a pen and a piece of paper. I know for those of you under 30, it's probably a digital device, but just make sure that all your messages are switched off on your digital device. And this is why we get our clients to write their actions down. And I get my clients to write down their major insights throughout a session, because we need to keep that top of mind. They need to be able to revisit it, because it's unbelievable how biased our brain is to actually forgetting. And then the last reason that I came up with the title of Platform 9 3/4, well, the second last reason, the last reason I'll tell you right at the end, but the second last reason is from J.K. Rowling herself, who said, "We do not need magic to change the world. We carry all the power we need inside ourselves already." And I have got an hour and 15 minutes to persuade you that you have the magic to train your brain and to learn in so much more of an effective way than you've been doing so far, and to support your clients to do the same. So let's go. We're going to be talking about 9 aspects, which happens very magically to fit into the name of my business, which is BrainWise. And I've come up with 9 aspects of focus for us about how we can use our brains better and how we can learn better. And then finally, I'll end up with the 3/4. So I'm going to talk about brain structure and function. Hopefully I'll be a whole lot more interesting than your biology teacher was at school. We'll talk about routes and pathways. How do we create neural pathways and more effective, and how do we get those neural pathways to stick? How do we pay attention? You're going to be shocked to see how we sabotage our attention ability so easily, and especially now with the digital devices that we've got surrounding us. We're going to talk about that instinctive reactive brain, of course, neuroplasticity, which is just most of our favorite subjects because we're coaches. How do we use our whole brain? How do we tap into our individual resources as well as our social resources, and I'll talk about spacing and emotions. So let's start with the B in BrainWise, which is brain structure. Just going to open up the chat. So, and Katie, if there's anything that's, oh, where's my chat? If there's anything that comes up that I should be paying attention to, then please just draw my attention there as we go along. Okay, great. Good. Okay, thanks everybody for adding when it wasn't heard. Tip number 1, make it novel. Tip number 2, write it down. Tip number 3, you're going to pay attention to something if you're trying to impress somebody you love. So I paid a lot of attention to this because I was trying to impress my husband's daughters. So brain structure. Again, I'm not going to go through this in any great detail. I'm going to talk about brain structure in a fairly generic way, but hopefully be a whole lot more interesting than your biology teacher was at school. So when I present on the brain in a group or in a face-to-face session, I often ask, what is the part of the brain that you remember hearing about at school? And it doesn't matter which country I'm in, when I'm training in Thailand or India or the US or Europe, it doesn't matter which country I'm in, the reply is almost always the medulla oblongata. Okay, almost everybody says that's the part of the brain I remember hearing about. And then I say, what is the medulla oblongata for? And most people, they try out, they say, well, it's to do with thinking, or it's to do with memory, or it's to do with emotions. No, in actual fact, the medulla oblongata is the part of the brain to do with sneezing, coughing, and vomiting. And that is what people are taught at school. So hopefully I'm going to teach you some more useful and interesting parts of your brain. So just to start with, obviously an absolutely critical part of our brain, which I'm sure most of you all know about, which is the prefrontal cortex. Okay, the prefrontal cortex right here behind your forehead. And this is the thinking, reasoning, decision-making, self-control part of your brain. Obviously very important in learning, and I'm going to talk very specifically about the prefrontal cortex in a whole section all on its own. Again, I'm talking, the brain is complex. It's a complex organ. And, you know, it's a little bit of a misnomer that we talk about this part does this and this part does this, because we're whole brained, we're not part brained. But there is predominant activity in our prefrontal cortex, blood flow, electrical activity when we are focusing, thinking, rationalizing, and reasoning. Another important part of the brain for us as coaches, and here come some tips, is the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is right here at the back of your brain. Now, you'll see when I talk about the prefrontal cortex, it takes up a very small amount of real estate in our brain. Your occipital lobe, your visual cortex, takes up a whole lot more real estate. Okay, this is actually where you see. Okay, you don't see with your eyes. Your eyes are merely a mechanism to take information into your brain, and this is where you represent visual imagery and then send the message to the prefrontal cortex so you can articulate what you're seeing. So the importance of this for learning is this part of the brain takes up a lot more real estate. In terms of brain evolution, it's a lot more ancient than your prefrontal cortex, and therefore people think in pictures. As coaches, we should use metaphors, analogies, stories, visuals, okay? My PowerPoint presentation is full of visuals because that's what people pay attention to. So when in learning, if you had to look at my study, maybe I'll show you a wizard on my study just now. There's mind maps, there's pictures, there's color, I've got flipboards in every room in my house. My children learn with Kokies and color and flipboards and pictures. Great leaders tell stories. Get your clients to tell their story. Get them to use metaphors. Get them to write things down. That is where the brain loves to hang out. So visual, it's one of the best tips that I can give you. Use visuals in whatever way possible. The parietal lobe, sensory motor cortex here at the top of your brain. Again, I'm going to talk about whole brain functioning. How do we use our senses? How do we use our experiential processing to hardwire learning and memory? And then, of course, I haven't actually put it here, but we've got our auditory cortex at the side of our brains as well. You probably heard of visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic learners. To an extent, there's some truth in it, not absolutely, but it's very few people are able to learn from an auditory perspective, merely listening. And what do teachers do at school? They go like this. And what happens to kids' ears when teachers do this? That. It's the same with grown-ups. Okay, so we need to engage with senses, we need to engage with pictures, we need to engage with rational thinking, all of these parts of the brain, not just auditory, in order to create the best learning. So if we were talking very linearly around the brain, we're talking about this outer cortex, which contains all of these higher functions. And then we have this inner part of our brain, which is the limbic system, the instinctive brain, the reactive brain. We learn with our entire brain. Our entire brain influences how we learn. So I'm going to talk about how the limbic system can both be leveraged for better learning and how can it also inhibit learning. So next we have the amygdala. Most of you know the amygdala is the part of the brain that is really processing what is salient about the information coming in. Is this something that is positive, that I can engage my thinking brain and be rational and move towards? Or is this something that is a threat that I need to react and use my survival brain? The amygdala is key in our learning processes. And interestingly enough, well, it's relevant for this talk, is right next to the amygdala. The amygdala hangs out right behind the prefrontal cortex and right next to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the part of the brain to do with short-term memory. So if we look at prefrontal cortex, is long-term memory. Prefrontal cortex, short-term memory. Hippocampus, long-term memory. So I'll give you just a quick sense of what this means. Think to yourselves, what is 2 plus 2? Okay. What is 3 times 3? I hope all of you are able to do these sums. What is 37 times 45? Okay, so 2 plus 2, 3 times 3, using your hippocampus, long-term memory, easy because you've wired that into your long-term memory. You've learned your 2 plus 2 and your 3 times table. In your 37 times 45, I'm now accessing your prefrontal cortex because you haven't learned that, or most of us haven't. Some people have got natural number counting abilities, which I'll talk about, people who have photographic memories. But generally speaking, almost all of us sitting on this call would have had to access our prefrontal cortex, our short-term memory. The last part of the brain I really want to mention in terms of structure today is the cerebellum. This is hangs out here behind the back of your brain. It's the part to do with movement and balance. There is a misconception in neuroscience. People have been talking about something called neurogenesis, which is the growth of new neurons. And people have been saying that neurogenesis occurs right throughout our lifetime. In fact, it doesn't. Neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons, primarily occurs up to the end of puberty. And after that, there's very, very little new neurons that are grown. In fact, a lot of neurons are lost, especially when we drink too much, lack sleep, we engage in our bad habits. So you really don't want to engage in bad habits because you're not going to replace those neurons. Why I'm connecting this to the cerebellum? Cerebellum is the part of the brain to do with movement and balance. Okay, this is the critical importance for exercise and activity. There's other important issues as well, but for exercise and activity for your teenagers, for your children. When they're sitting here stuck behind the computer, that is not developing neurogenesis. It's not developing great brain health. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So if I don't see any questions, I'll carry on. At certain times, I will just stop and open up for questions as well. But please do throw them into the chat. Even if we don't answer them all today, it'll sort of guide my sense of what it is that you're looking for. Okay, so brain structure. Then we talk about the roots and the pathways. I'm sure most of you know how the brain functions. We have between 80 and 100 billion brain cells. Okay, remember you're going to lose them as you get older, and you can replace them when you're much younger. 80 to 100 billion
brain cells, and each one of these brain cells has got a whole lot of connections coming off it, which connects it to other neurons. So as I have a thought, what will happen is a little electrical impulse will pass down the extension of one neuron to another neuron through the axons and dendrites, and bathed in this whole brain are a whole lot of neurochemicals. So this whole functioning, the roots and the pathways that are, the neural pathways that are created when we learn are all connected to electrical activity in our brain. Your brain has got so much electrical activity that at any one time, you could, if I could plug into you, you would be able to light up a light bulb with your brain activity. So we've got all this brain electrical activity and specific neurochemicals. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, in a little while, about the kinds of neurochemistry we need to leverage in order to do good learning. So we're going to talk about these roots and pathways and how we make different connections in our brains. First of all, I want you to think about an apple. Okay, everybody think about an apple. Okay, I'm taking my slides down because I'm going to go into my whiteboard now. So I've got a few faces in front of me. It's lovely to see those of you who are on video. So I'm going to just call on somebody. If you want to get a get out of jail free card and not answer it, you can get one get out of jail free card. But I just want to ask Nikki Liang. You popped right into my visual cortex there. Nikki, can you come with me?
Yes. Hello.
Hi, Nikki. Nikki, can you tell me, when you think about an apple, what comes into your mind?
A very great ingredient for my green smoothie. I almost drink it every day.
Good. So it's healthy. You can have an apple drink. You probably pictured an apple when I said to you, think about an apple. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Nikki. That wasn't too difficult. My questions get harder for everybody. So you can rest now.
Thank you.
I'm joking, not really. Okay. So basically, as I'm thinking about an apple, as I'm asking you about an apple, you start to process, you start to get a whole lot of neural pathways around an apple occurring in your brain. So I'm just going to share my whiteboard for a second. Basically, when I asked about the apple, okay, what came up is there's not one little apple neuron that you've got right over here with all your apple information. What we have is a whole lot of connections across our brain to do with an apple. So we've got the color of the apple, the fact that it's healthy for us, the fact that we can have apple as a juice. Why on earth is Colleen asking me about an apple? We basically think about everything in these connections across our brain. So there we had the, why is Colleen asking me about an apple? What does an apple look like? The taste of the apple. In my long-term memory, remember drinking apple juice. Okay, so all these connections across our brain is how we think. This is how you think about everything. This is how you think about your kid. Do you think about that cup of coffee in front of you, about your work, about your clients? Everything we think about, we think in these connections across our brain. You know, when people say you left brain, right brain, I'll talk about the difference with the hemispheres, but it's strictly not that we have a left brain and we have a right brain. It's much more complicated than that. So I'm just going to keep an eye on the chat here. Yeah, interesting, Sarah. Some of us needed to think through and filter the impact of accent on how we understood the question. There was a whole lot of processing that we had to do there as we were as we were listening to the answer there about an apple. Now, I'm just going to tell you a whole lot of things about an apple which you may or may not know. Some of you may have thought about Apple computers or Apple iPad. Some of you might have thought about, I don't know if any of you know, that Gwyneth Paltrow's daughter, she's 16 or 17 years old, is called Apple. That's her name. You might have thought of the apple in the Garden of Eden. You know, classically the Christian perception of the apple being really symbolic of temptation and of the fall of man. In paganism, apple is a symbol for love. Some of you even might have thought of Isaac Newton, who came up with his universal law of gravitation when, as legend says it, an apple fell on his head. In actual fact, the true story is that he was observing apples in an orchard and not one did not fall on his head. So basically what I've just done is I've expanded your Apple network in your brain. We're now thinking Apple computers, Isaac Newton, Adam and Eve, paganism. Essentially what I've just done is I have expanded your banana map. And that is called learning. Isn't that wonderful? That is what you're doing every day of our lives. We are adding to the existing maps in our brain. And now these maps either stay and become a part of us or they disappear. Clearly, when we're coaching, what are we doing? We're not wanting our clients to tell us the same story. We don't visit the past and what's already happened and what they've already thought. When my client says to me, well, I thought that maybe I could try this. I say to him, I don't want to know what you have thought. I want to know what you haven't yet thought, because that's my job, is to facilitate new thinking and new maps in my client's brain. Now, clearly, what we're wanting to do is we're wanting those maps to hardwire. We're wanting those maps to become permanent, okay? Because as I said to you at the beginning of this program, it is so easy for these maps to just disappear. So my challenge now is for all of you to go, I don't know how fast this is going to go. Let's have a bit of fun with it, is to go into the chat and put in what are the techniques that you know help information stick in your brain. Obviously, we've already got write it down. We've already got novelty. We've already got to make it about somebody you love. Okay. Okay. So everybody just start to put into the chat. And I think, Sarah, we're going to keep this chat afterwards. So we'll come back to all of these as we go along. Okay.
I'll try and read some for you, Colleen. So
okay.
there's
Please.
repetition, there's metaphor that's put to a song, experience, teaching somebody or something, create meaning, build a story around it, say it aloud. That's something that works for me as well. Practice, flashcards, practice, repetition, sing it, repeat, repeat. Using multiple modalities, action it, context, lots of repeat coming, visual pictures, making connections, visualize. I love that because I try and do that as well. In fact, when you said apple, I visualized apple crumble and I'm already thinking of a nice smelly apple crumble being baked.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so do it, preparing to teach, relevance, story. Yeah, lots of nice answers. Journal. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, so basically, Abby, I could actually go home now. Well, I am at home, but I could leave. I mean, this is brilliant. And I think if we can keep a copy of this and we can hashtag tips, every single one of these are relevant. I'm probably going to just explore why these are relevant. We do know how to learn, but for some reason, we completely sabotage our learning. We don't engage in all of these skills. So these are fantastic. Abby, very interesting from what you just said to me. Is that you thought about apple crumble, okay, and you could visualize it and you could smell it. So here's an interesting fact. I don't know if it's really to do with actually we can make it to do with learning. Is that neurogenesis actually does occur in grown-ups' brains, in adults' brains, but only in the olfactory process. So smell, we can actually leverage smell to connect to learning. If we say, for example, they have aromatherapy oils. While I used to do this when I used to teach kids how to study. Burn the aromatherapy oils or have like lemon as an aromatherapy oil on your desk, but then take the oil into the exam as well, and it will facilitate the access of the memories of what you learned when you're at your desk. So that was quite interesting.
Wow. This is a tip for me. I will use it with my son, Colleen. Thank you.
Yeah, lots of, and that's another nice thing that I'm sure all these wonderful ideas here. It's another lovely thing that you've said, Abby, is that you'll use it with my son. Remember, I said if somebody you make it about somebody you love. So if you just put your son front and foremost in this conversation today, you're going to remember a lot more of what we say because it's going to be much more meaningful to you. Okay, and there's other tips around that I'll. Yeah. Okay, wow. Okay, I repeat that tip about smell, sense, and learning. Just that we do have neurogenesis. We grow new neurons in our olfactory processes in our brain throughout our lifetime. So therefore, we can access and leverage smell to link to learning. And even, I'll talk about how do we use our whole brain, you know, all of our senses. It's not kind of something I tend to do with my clients, is to say, so what does success smell like? But kind of, I'm thinking maybe that would be quite useful, you know, engage with their sense of smell as well as their visual cortex and their auditory cortex and all the other parts of their brain as well. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to, let me just go back to my slides. Sorry, let me just stop sharing. Oh, wrong. I'm multitasking here, which I'm about to start telling you all about. Okay. So we discussed these neural pathways, and we're going to talk about how do we hardwire them right throughout the rest of the process. Okay, we did the chat room. So now I want to talk about the A in the BrainWise, which is paying attention. Basically, this is probably your number one tip, okay? We cannot learn if we don't pay attention. In order to learn something, we need to pay attention to it. And we're talking about we're not talking about creative learning or experiential learning. We're actually talking about focused learning, wanting something to be absorbed into our brains. And this is where I'm going to talk primarily about the prefrontal cortex. Okay, so the prefrontal cortex, remember, the part of the brain to do with decision making, thinking, understanding, recalling, self-discipline. It's this part of our brain right here behind our forehead. Now, this part of the brain we completely sabotage in so many subtle and not so subtle ways. So the first thing we need to understand about this prefrontal cortex of ours is that it is incredibly small, unbelievably small, in comparison to the rest of the brain. So I'll talk about how do we take breaks, how do we space our learning. We'll talk about that. I see a few people put that into the chat. But what we have to remember is that you can only take in so much information at a time. So to sit down for 4 or 5 or 6 hours and to think that your poor little prefrontal cortex is going to absorb all that information is completely impossible. And I'll talk about how do we time our learning sessions, how do we time our coaching sessions. But just remember that it is tiny in comparison to the rest of the brain. It is so much more difficult to access our thinking focused attention. It's so much easier to access the rest of our brain because it takes up a whole lot more real estate. It is also sequential. And what I mean by that is that we can only do one cognitive task at a time. The bad news is multitasking is a myth. Please do not think that you can be listening to this presentation and doing your emails at the same time. It is completely impossible. You will become functionally stupid, sorry, but when you are multitasking. But what do? We tell people they must multitask. It is a complete myth. You cannot do 2 cognitive tasks at the same time. So the problem that we inhabiting now with the world that we're in is this digital overload, this digital tsunami that is striking us. That we, first of all, information is so overloading. We have our digital devices. You've got mails, little light flashing on our cell phones, distracting our attention all the time. And what happens is that the brain just starts to slow down and to slow down and to slow down. As you're multitasking, it's like your brain is a computer. And you know, in your computer, when you open up file after file after file in your computer and you start getting that, what I call the spinning ball of doom, okay, your computer completely slows down. When you're multitasking, that is what happens to your brain. My daughter cannot sit and study while she's watching TV. It'll just take her double the amount of time to study. So she knows that she has a choice. She has determined, and I'll tell you about the determined times and moments when she studies. And when she studies, she switches off all her digital devices. Carla's asking about how is the time we're able to learn using attention different for different ages. So this is an interesting thing, Carla, is, and I'll talk about it when I talk about neuroplasticity, is that prefrontal cortex that we're wanting to really leverage and access in focused attention work is only fully developed at the age of 25. Okay, so there's other techniques that we can use to also leverage learning, because optimal learning time is up until the age of 25. But if we have developed good focus and good attention, and that is the part of our brain that we have leveraged and used, and I'll talk about that more with neuroplasticity, then we're more able to focus and pay attention. Unfortunately, so many people, kids are going to school and they've just been distracted their entire lives, and then the teacher asks them to pay attention. They can't pay attention, then they're diagnosed with ADHD or whatever and put on medication. I'm not saying that there isn't a real reason for sometimes kids to have medication, but unfortunately it's often because our children are just not taught to pay attention. There's a wonderful neuroscientist by the name of Amy Arnston, and she's the specialist in the prefrontal cortex, and she calls the prefrontal cortex the Goldilocks of the brain. And what we mean by that is that the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is everything has to be just right. Okay, so you know how Goldilocks and the Three Bears, if you know the story, the porridge couldn't be too hot or too cold, the bed couldn't be too hard or too soft. Your brain is the same. If you're anxious, if you're worried, if you're fearful, you're not going to be able to pay attention. So we're going to talk about how do we create the right brain state for learning to happen. And metabolically hungry is my favorite because this changed my life profoundly. Okay, the well-known neuroscientist, Dr. Roy Baumeister, said that we have a limited bucket of resources for activities like decision-making and impulse control. And when we use these up, we don't have as much for the next activity. So if you had to just picture a bucket, okay? Now, basically what's happening in your brain is as you go through the day, you're using up the bucket, you're using up the bucket, you're using up the bucket. Key, you are so lucky that you are in California right now, because now in Johannesburg, where I am, it is now 6:45 and my bucket is pretty damn empty. Your bucket is still full because it's at the beginning of the day. Now, why I say this changed my life profoundly is because when I learned this about the brain, okay, and about this bucket of resources, I started to wake up earlier and do my studying. I got all of my degrees while I worked full time and I was a single mom. But I would wake up earlier in the morning and do the difficult cognitive tasks when my bucket was at its best. And I would save the easier tasks to the later in the day. So what used to take me an hour in the morning would take my student colleagues 4 hours in the evening. This changed my life profoundly. And still to this day, I do the most difficult tasks at the beginning of the day when my brain is functioning at its best. So why do we forget? Okay, so I come home from work and I lose my keys, which I do pretty often. So my teenage daughter raises her eyebrows to the ceiling, as only teenagers can do, and says, "Oh, mommy, you're getting old." And I say, "No, Abigail, I merely have more occupying my neural pathways than you do, and therefore it takes me longer to find my keys." Okay, you can borrow that if you like. So we don't get more stupid as we get older, okay? We just have more occupying us, and therefore we start to forget. A lot of people go, "Oh, I'm getting old. I'm starting to forget." But we start creating a belief that we're getting old and therefore we're forgetting. I want you to change that narrative. What you just need to do is you need to create strategies to help you remember. So what I've got hooks next to my door where I hang my keys so that I don't have to think about where to find them. So those hooks are another tip, by the way, to create hooks for learning, hooks for memory. Who here, okay, I'm not seeing all of your faces, but I bet if I had to say who's bad at remembering people's names, okay, the majority of you would put up your hands. And I would say, no, you're not bad at remembering people's names. You're just damn lazy. You don't have a strategy for paying attention when you are introduced to a person for a start. And secondly, find a hook. So Abby, I never forget your name ever because my daughter's name is Abby. So when I first met her, I just linked into the Abby. Okay, make connections, somebody that you know, or make a picture. If the person's name is, I don't know, Eileen, picture her leaning or something, you know, and remember, the more fun it is, the more you're likely to remember it. Right, so that's our attention. The next part is this instinctive, reactive part of our brain. So if you think about what happens to you when you have a big fright, something scary, okay, something gives you a big fright. Immediately, your body readies itself for action. Your heart beats, you can't breathe properly, you get a fine layer of sweat on your skin, your stomach contracts, you can't think clearly. Okay, that's what happens when we get a big fright. And hopefully we're not getting big frights in our schooling systems or in our coaching sessions, but just even the smallest threat creates the same reaction in our brain as if we are facing a saber-toothed tiger or a person with a gun. Okay, obviously there's degrees of extensiveness, but it creates the same response in the brain. So what happens? The brain is designed to survive, actually. It's not designed to think. So in that moment when we get a big fright, that amygdala that I spoke about, that part that decides, are we going to use the thinking brain or are we going to use the instinctive brain? When I'm under a threat, immediately that amygdala sends a message to my adrenal glands, powers out adrenaline into my system. My heart beats so that the blood can go to my muscles so I can run away from the attacker. My breathing becomes rapid and shallow so that the oxygen can go to my muscles. A fine layer of sweat cools my muscles so that I can be more powerful. So in that moment when I get a big fright, instantaneously my brain pours out the adrenaline, or my body pours out the adrenaline, and there's a corresponding neurochemical that is released at the same time, and that is called cortisol. What is cortisol? A neural inhibitor. The other neurochemicals I talk about are neurotransmitters. They allow the message to pass across. The cortisol stops messages from being passed across. So the message here, basically what I'm saying, is if your kid is in class with a bully or a scary teacher, or if your client has got a threatening boss, or is disliked by the rest of the members of the team, or something like that, that person will be in a threat state in their brain. The cortisol will be pumping through and they won't be thinking clearly. I truly think that we are being heavily influenced by this now during COVID times. It's so stressful. People are anxious. People are worried. COVID is a saber-toothed tiger. Lockdown is a saber-toothed tiger. And we are basically fighting and freezing all the time, which completely inhibits our learning. So what is the message here? It's the competency of trust and safety, that as coaches, we need to create that safe space. We need to help our clients calm their limbic systems down and get into a headspace where they are able to access their prefrontal cortex. Okay, I'm just going to talk about 2 more and then we're going to go into a breakaway. The fifth, is, you can see it's late in the evening for me, Key. Neuroplasticity, and this was the one you said, and Abby, you said that you loved this so much. So essentially, if I had a brain in my hands, okay, that is one of my bucket list dreams, but that's not a real, that's a made up picture there. If I had a brain in my hands, I could literally dig my finger into this brain, because a brain is so remarkably soft. It is so soft that if I had to take a brain out of a skull and put it onto the desk, the brain would immediately misshapen, which is wonderful, wonderful news, because it talks to the concept of neuroplasticity. I don't have to talk to the converted here. You are coaches, and coaches, the very reason we exist is because we understand neuroplasticity. People have the capacity to change right throughout their lifetime. It's like going to gym and exercising. As you lift a weight, your muscle gets stronger, thicker, and denser. It's the same with your brain. The more you use it, the more you learn, the better your brain becomes, the more your brain thickens and strengthens. When I was doing my PhD, I said to my daughter, you'll think I'm mad. I said to her, Abigail, I feel like my brain is growing. I can feel it getting thicker. I'm sure it probably was. I wasn't really feeling it, but I could almost sense that was happening. This also talks to a growth mindset, which I could do a whole 2-hour talk about, believing that we can change. I don't have to persuade people about a growth mindset because I know about neuroplasticity. We've got the capacity to change, and we can change right throughout our lifetime. So some neurochemicals that are important in order to facilitate neuroplasticity. Okay, I'm going to talk about 3, and these are neurotransmitters, not neuroinhibitors. Number 1, in order to change your brain, there has to be some kind of reason to change the brain, some kind of agitation. If everything is fine and you're happy and life is just the way you want it, you're not going to be prompted to go and make changes. So the first neurochemical that is actually necessary, interestingly enough, is adrenaline. We call it norepinephrine in the brain. Norepinephrine. Okay, slight agitation. You don't want your clients to be completely comfortable and happy. And when my client sits there and says, I say, what do you want to change? They go, nothing. I say, well, come back when you need a coach. You know, we want that discomfort, not too extreme so that we're activating the limbic system to override the prefrontal cortex, but just to have some level of adrenaline or norepinephrine in the system. The second neurochemical is called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the neurochemical to do with focus. If there is no focus, neuroplasticity does not occur. So if you want to change anything within your brain, you need to pay focused attention to whatever it is you want to learn or you want to change. And then the last one is dopamine. There's many, obviously, but that I'm going to discuss today. Dopamine is the reward neurochemical. For neuroplasticity is not going to happen. We are not going to pay attention. We're not going to put in the effort. We're not going to do the repetition if there's no reward for the learning. So often what teachers forget, what parents forget is they lose the joy, they lose the fun, they lose the passion and the excitement for learning that our children need to have. So being stressed, being agitated is a good thing because it's a signal. What can I learn? What do I need to learn? What do I need to change in my brain? I need to then pay attention. That's why we set actions with our clients. We set goals with our clients. Pay attention to what it is that you're going to learn. Okay, and we need to create frequent rewards where there's a reward and a meaning behind the new learning occurring. So neuroplasticity, we could also have spoken about just for a few hours, but I'll leave it to Harry Potter, who says, it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be. You are not limited by your hereditary. You have the capacity to change your brain profoundly through your lifetime. And the last one, before we go into a quick breakaway, is to talk about whole brain functions. Okay, the whole brain functions really, and I just love this picture when I found it, because you know that an owl can actually rotate his head completely around. Now we as humans are completely limited, is that we have got this left hemisphere and right hemisphere. Okay, we've got a line down the middle of our bodies. Everything on the right side of my body is controlled by my left hemisphere. Everything on the left side of the body is controlled by my right hemisphere. So this is really important because what we know about learning is, you heard about left brain thinkers and right brain thinkers. There are differences in the hemispheres, but people are much more effective when they are whole brain thinkers. When people use their linear, logical parts of their brain, they use their creative, emotional parts of the brain, they integrate their whole brain. That is when people learn better. What do poor kids do at school? They sit there studying, using their visual cortex, focusing. There's no crossing of the midline. Okay, very important to actually get that left and right hemisphere integrated. You might have heard about brain gym. Brain gym is critically important. I don't know if you're going to do it with your clients, but maybe you can. Let me show you. Let me demonstrate some brain gym. If you can all stand up, okay, I'll go back a little bit, okay. What I'd like you to do is take your right elbow to your left knee, okay? If you're not so subtle, you can just put your hand to your knee, okay? Now your left elbow to your right knee and keep that going. That is crossing the midline. That is what a occupational therapist will do with your kid if your kid is struggling to learn. Okay, I'll give you another one. Everybody put your hand on your nose and cross over and hold your ear on the other side. Okay, doing that? Right, now clap and swap, clap and swap, clap and swap, clap. Okay, sorry, I love it when I do that. It's such fun. But that is great exercise for crossing the midline, for facilitating whole brain function. This, when your kid is doing this, there's no crossing of the midline and learning does not occur. So please get your kids to engage in cross-brain functioning. Also, there's no better way to learn than to teach. Because when I'm teaching, I'm using my social brain. I'm using my my auditory cortex. Hopefully I'm using pictures and diagrams and images. I'm showing, I'm teaching, I'm telling stories. Teaching integrates whole brain function. Remember the good teachers. I had this most incredible teacher at school. She was unbelievable. She's actually one of my best friends to this day. She was an English teacher. She was so good that out of a class of 40 matriculants, 28 of us went and did English at university, including, by the way, some of the girls doing chemistry. They took English as an elective because this teacher was so brilliant. And can I tell you what, in fact, this picture reminds me of her a little. What she did is she danced. She jumped on the tables. She took us outside. We walked up and down. We recited poetry. We put on Shakespearean plays. She made us love the subject. She engaged our whole brains. And every single one of us became really good at English literature. Right. So,
Colleen, there was a question, if I can interrupt real quick. There was a question in the chat. Kathy Thompson asked, when you say reward in a coaching context, do you mean celebrating success and giving praise, or actually physical rewards that the coachee might give themselves?
So I think it's important, obviously, to encourage the coachee to celebrate success. Absolutely. So whether it's in conversation with myself as the coach, or whether it's what are you going to do to celebrate this outcome that you've achieved, or the fact that you have stuck to whatever it is you were going to stick to this week. So definitely encouraging them to create a environment of celebration and reward for themselves. Yes, it's about being in the coaching conversation and saying, what is it that we're celebrating, or how's it feel, or even potentially taking them to that future state. That's why we do visioning questions. What is this going to look like? How's it going to feel? How's it going to smell? Abby, that's my new one now. What's it going to look like? What are people going to be saying? We're facilitating the right neurochemistry when we do visioning. I'm just hesitating, Key, because I don't say well done to my clients because I'm not their parent, but I encourage them to, and I acknowledge their efforts, and I acknowledge their wisdom and how they've shifted, etc. All of it is about celebration. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to have a quick breakaway, an 8-minute breakaway, and here's your challenge in the breakaway. Your challenge is to, you're going to be in a group of 4, more or less, and each person has got 2 minutes to remind and teach somebody else in the group one of the tips that meant something to them, and just do it the best you can. Hopefully everybody gets a turn. Okay, it looks like most people are back. It's a pity we haven't got a long time to kind of debrief on that, but we've been looking at some of the comments and questions in the chat, and we commented that the one about music is pretty interesting, because people
there you go.
Should I or shouldn't I?
Oh,
listen?
take care.
Sorry, somebody's got the should I or shouldn't I listen to music while I'm studying? And the answer is it depends. Like so many of these things, remember, there's no 2 brains are alike, and we need to learn to leverage. In fact, I'll talk about that now, the way our brain works the best. So in terms of music in the brain, if there's a lot of distractions around, I mean, in South Africa, a lot of people live in households that have got many, many members of families and external people living in the environment, and for the kids to study, it's really hard. If they can put on some earphones and minimize the distractions, then it's really beneficial. Also, if a person is we've got different kinds. Some people have got a very quiet sort of autonomic nervous system. Some people are more excitable. Generally speaking, somebody with a more excitable nervous system like myself, I can't have music, I can't have distractions in the background because I'm too easily distracted and focused elsewhere. People like my husband who've got much calmer kind of dispositions, for them, it actually can benefit them to listen to music. It also depends on the time of day. So I guess the short answer to that is it depends. In terms of whether classical music, like Baroque music, enhances learning, and that is very much debatable, with the debate erring on the side of it actually doesn't make a difference. I love Baroque music, and I can play it in the background when I need to feel calm and peaceful, and obviously a calm and peaceful brain learns a whole lot better. Definitely, yes, about honoring the brain's uniqueness, and also using songs. Somebody said earlier, making rhythms and songs out of learning, by the way, is a brilliant way to learn. It engages with novelty, whole brain functioning, many different kinds of things. Okay, so let's just go in quickly. I've got another couple of slides here. Where am I? I'm now on the I of BrainWise, and I wanted to talk about individual and social learning. In terms of individual learning, remember I said make it about your child, Abby. There's nothing more important to you than your child, okay? So therefore, if it's to do with your child, you're going to remember it. But there's also nothing more important to us than about ourselves. So if if you need to learn something that's abstract, something that you don't really care about, how can you make it meaningful and relevant to you? I'm always doing that with my clients. Why is this important to you? What kind of difference is this going to make in your life? With my son, I say to him, he's got to learn cloud formation at school. So we go outside and I say, Gabriel, imagine if you were climbing on a cirrus cloud. Imagine you were inside a cumulonimbus cloud. You know, what would that be like? I make it experiential. I make it personal to him because he doesn't really care about cloud formation. The other part of this that I felt was really important just to mention here, because we're coaches and we all know about how our beliefs create our reality. And so many people have such limited conditioned beliefs about learning. I think we create incredibly negative learning environments where people believe that I can't learn, I'm stupid, I'm not able to do this. You know, those beliefs that we have become our reality. And we need to help our clients, we need to help our children and ourselves change the self-talk that we have, change that conditioned narrative that is to do with learning. One of them is that learning is not fun. And I'll tell you my story about how my life changed profoundly with learning about the brain and learning how to learn, because I thought it was awful before I learned how to use my brain properly and make it fun. So the belief drives your reality. We need to create the right beliefs in ourselves about our ability to learn, and everybody has the capacity to learn so much more than they are doing right now because we know about neuroplasticity. And then social. The brain loves to engage in social learning as long as it's positive social learning. Remember, if it's too much threat, then we disconnect our thinking with
Richard,
too much cortisol.
do you want to eat here or in the conference table?
Sorry, Sarah, I think somebody needs to be muted there. I'm not sure. A little bit of disruption. When we are, there's a lot of debate around oxytocin. I'm sure you've all heard of it. Oxytocin is the cuddle neurochemical, is only produced when we're in physical presence with another human being. Actually, because even thinking about something produces that neurochemistry. So even thinking about being present with another human being can elicit some forms of oxytocin. So that is why social learning occurs, because oxytocin facilitates neural pathways, the development and the connections between neurons. So really, as long as it's a positive social environment. If you're sitting here or in a room and there's somebody who's been making eyes at your husband, you're not going to have great oxytocin, and great learning isn't going to happen. So really, at social learning, my daughter leverages this. She gets her little group together to study a particular subject, and they each teach each other a different section using the principle of teaching. And Abby always gets the most difficult section because she knows if that she has to teach it, then she's going to learn it the best. And she only does it with her friends that she enjoys. So help your clients to say, who can you tell about this? Who can you engage with you in this journey that you're going on? Engage in that. Also that accountability, we know that's very powerful for our clients. If they've got an accountability partner that is going to meet them for a run every morning, it's great motivation as well. In terms of the S for spacing, okay, a few people mentioned this right at the beginning, and I'm going to talk about two things to do with spacing. One is we've got two rhythms that our brain basically works about, timing rhythms. One is the circadian rhythm, which most of you have heard about. The circadian rhythm is your 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. So I'll talk about sleep, but first I'm going to talk about something called the ultradian rhythm. The ultradian rhythm is a 90-minute cycle that your brain goes through in terms of, you go through it all through the night while you sleep, and you also go through it through the day. So basically, remember the bucket of resources. Your brain is best at the beginning of the day. By the way, there are individual differences. Some people take an hour or two to wake up, but generally speaking, the resources are at the best early in the day. And we need to leverage this 90-minute cycle. Basically, what it's saying is that you have got about a 90-minute process where your brain can pay attention. Usually the first 4 or 5 minutes is to get into focus. We have about a 70-minute period of time where we can really focus. Obviously, it's going to be better at the beginning of the day than at the end of the day. And then at the end of that 90-minute cycle, our focus is going to wane. And this is why we should take breaks. Actually, just going to share something on my whiteboard. Give me a second here to basically, and apologies for this, but my writing is not great, so just put up with my, basically, this is how people learn, okay? As they sit down for, say, 3 hours for a 3-hour session. I know when I ask people, they say, no, they sit down at work and they sit down at their desk for 6 hours or 8 hours or ridiculous hours. And what happens to your learning is your ability, you have this cycle where you go along, and eventually it starts to drop and it starts to drop and it starts to drop. Okay, so your intake, the absorption is much, much smaller at the end of those 3 hours. All we need to do is take a break. Guess what? You have a break, and you're going to get that much increase in recall. Have 2 breaks, you're going to get that much increase in recall. So merely having a break ensures that you remember something, that you leveraging your brain a whole lot better, as well as doing the more difficult cognitive tasks at the beginning of the day. By the way, your brain functions much better in a more broad, spatial kind of way later in the afternoon. So your more creative tasks, where it's not needing focus and strategic thinking, is actually better done in the afternoon. I'm really strategic about how I use my brain. Because I find coaching pretty easy now, I try to do it later in the day when I can access, I don't need to think hard, but if I know that my client needs to do some real hard thinking, then I need to make it the sessions earlier in the day to support my clients. It's just, while I've got my whiteboard, and it probably goes back to the individual and social learning as well, I've got a theory. I call it the brick in the wall theory. When we learn, okay, before you go to school, you learn your numbers. You learn what a 1 is and a 2 is and a 5 is, okay? Then you go to school, you learn addition. Then you learn subtraction. You learn multiplication. You learn division. You learn long division. You learn algebra. You learn geometry, and then you learn calculus. We cannot learn calculus if you haven't learned your numbers. So what does this bricks in the wall say? There's a whole lot of lessons in it for me as a coach. The one is learning happens 1 brick at a time. If your client wants to go and run a marathon, they're not going to go run a marathon tomorrow. First, this week, they need to walk 3 times. Next week, they need to run 4 times. Then they need to run a 5K race, etc., etc., etc. So it's one step. Yes, scaffolding, Bethany, absolutely. 1 step at a time. The other thing about this is, what happens to the kid who goes to 5th grade and has got a terrible teacher? Okay, they hate maths, or they think they're useless at maths for the rest of their lives. They're not. There's just a missing brick in the wall. Now, please don't say to your clients, I see that you have a missing brick in the wall, because it sounds insulting. But usually we know that when somebody comes with a challenge, people know how to go on diet. People know how to get fit. People know how to build businesses. But there's something missing. Often it's a belief about themselves or something that's happened that has stopped them from in their tracks. And that's why people procrastinate, by the way. Often it's just because we don't know the next step forward. So our job as a coach is to help them fill in the missing brick in the wall, take 1 step at a time. And like we were talking about earlier, creating that dopamine vision, goal setting. Where is it we're going? Let them see the big picture. In learning, we call it the gestalt. When people see the whole picture, they're much more likely to engage with the step-by-step process. So that's my brick in the wall process. That is to do with the spacing. In terms of sleep, again, I know we could spend hours and hours and hours on sleep, but sleep is absolutely critical for learning. So learning occurs basically when we're paying attention, when we're focusing, okay? It's reinforced by the reward that we have for the learning, but sleep is completely required in order to solidify those neural pathways. You actually learn while you sleep. The quality of sleep is critically important. I know we could do a whole talk on sleep, and maybe we'll do that sometime. The quality of sleep is important. The quantity of sleep is important. You know how much sleep you should be getting. It's one of those, what are they called, a normal curve. Most of us need 8 hours of sleep. Some people need 9 hours of sleep or even more. Some people can do as little as 5 or 6. Very, very few people, though. It's right down at the bottom of the curve. If you say, I can make do with 5 or 6 hours sleep, you are profoundly sabotaging the efficacy of your brain. So sleep is absolutely critical for learning. And then the last one that I want to come to is the E, which is the emotions. Spoken a little bit about it when we spoke about the threat state. I want you to think about something, and you can answer this in the chat. Okay, if you have to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 about how you found school, learning at school. Did you find it boring and were you unhappy, or did you find it joyful and exciting? Let me just see some numbers in the chat of how did you find learning? Was it, where on that scale? Oh, there's some 10s, that's wonderful. Some, oh, I want to come and live in your countries. Okay, mine was definitely about a 2 or a 3.
Really lots of 9 and 10s. I mean,
Lots of 9s and 10s, yeah. That is good news, okay?
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, I didn't have such a great schooling and parent. I was pretty much bored and unhappy. Depends on the teacher, Doug says, absolutely. And subjects, absolutely, Manisha. We enjoy something, we like something, we're more likely to pay attention to it, okay? But the message that I want to give here is we need to make learning joyful and exciting. When I used to run study skills courses for kids, I used to say to them, you're going to think at the end of this course, you're going to say that learning and studying is the best fun you've ever had. And they'd look at me like you're crazy, you know. And at the end, I'd say, so is it the best fun? And they'd say, absolutely, because I got them to engage with laughter and humor and imagination and creativity and have fun and draw and use pictures and use their body and sing songs. And be vulgar and be outrageous and all of these things that make learning exciting for children. Okay, don't be vulgar with your clients, please. What happens is when we create that positive brain state, not too excited that it's ridiculous and our brains are agitated, we've just won the lottery, but not bored and unhappy. When we create that correct brain state, an alpha brainwave state, it's a relaxed brainwave state, it errs on the side of positive. That is when people learn the best. So my message here is be like Einstein, okay? Yes, he was brilliant, but he also had a whole lot of fun. So I'm just going to complete quickly and then we'll have a few minutes to open up for answers, questions and answers. As just said, I'd share my story. So really my story was that when I hated school, I was unhappy at school. I might have been diagnosed with ADHD when I was at school, but in those days there wasn't such a good thing. And I could have really done with the support and the help that I could have been given because I couldn't focus, I couldn't pay attention. I was the naughty child, but I was naughty because I didn't know how to cope. And when I say naughty, I don't know, let off stink bombs and that kind of thing. It wasn't kind of terrible rebelling. I failed grade 11, which was about 16, 17 years old. I failed dismally. I got like 3% for French and 17% for maths. And I thought I was stupid. I had this brilliant brother. I thought I was stupid. I had no self-belief in myself. And when I failed, my father, in desperation, because he was an academic, took me on a brain-based learning course. It was actually Tony Bazan. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. And I did this course where I learned about mind mapping and speed reading and all these wonderful things. And it profoundly changed my life experience. It didn't happen immediately. I left school. I did okay. I dropped out of university 3 times. I think it's quite spectacular how many times I was able to drop out of university. But then I started to understand the neuroscience. I started to learn more about the brain and how I could do so much better. I don't have a high IQ at all, not at all. I just know how to use my brain better. Now I've got 5 degrees. I love learning. I love studying. It excites me. I embrace it because learning is fun. Learning is exciting. So here's my last message, my 9 3/4 message. The 3/4 of it is either you have to believe that you can get through the wall. You have to believe that you can get to the platform 9 3/4. And that's what I need you to do, is to not 3/4 believe, but completely believe in yourself so that you can enter what has always been a wall that prevents you from learning and embrace the capacity that your brain has. Thank you, everyone. Have we got a couple of minutes for questions, Key, Abby?
I think we do. Yes. Thank you so much, Colleen. I'm very emotional because this was really profoundly transformative for me. How's everybody feeling?
Lots of nice things I can see in the chat
Yeah.
at this point.
Awesome.
Energized, fantastic, awesome. Yeah.
Great. So we do have a few minutes for questions. If anybody wants to ask your question, I think we can have people unmute for a question, if that's possible. Sarah, tell me if I'm lying. I hope I'm not.
No, it's possible. They can unmute if they want to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions, comments?
Hmm.
Amy Berenson?
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm fascinated by this 90-minute circadian, if I'm pronouncing that right, rhythm. And what is the optimum? Is it every 90 minutes somebody should take a break, or is it more frequently, or does it change by person?
Again, I'm quite strong on I talk generically in my talks, obviously, but we all know ourselves, and we can play with it as well. So I know for me, it's a 60 minutes. I can focus for 60 minutes. But a lot of the neuroscientists are kind of saying that we take the 90-minute cycle because it takes us a little bit of time to get into our learning or studying or our work or whatever it is, doing the focused work for about 60, 70 minutes, and then it starts to wane off, but that's okay. Maybe we're taking care of some details. And then a 20-minute break. How should we take the breaks? Obviously, you want to get blood flow, you want to get oxygen. Taking a break is not doing your emails. Taking a break is not going and reading a book. It's about getting energetic, being energized, crossing the midline, doing all of those kind of things. Amy as well, I can't say from 7 o'clock to 9:15, that's where you're kind of, or 9:30, whatever. That it depends on when you wake up. Some people take a little bit longer to wake up. I know for myself that I like to get stuck in straight away if I can, because I'm at my optimal as I wake up. Other people takes them a little bit of time. Exercise really good for you when you wake up. It actually allows you to sustain higher levels of focus within that ultradian rhythm through the day as well, as long as you're not exhausting yourself and doing the cardiovascular exercise where you're depleting all of your glycogen. Sorry, that's a long answer to a short question.
No, it's great. Thank you.
Hey, Colleen, this is Manisha. I had a question. So my
Manisha.
question was around this left and right brain, centricity that we hear about. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Is it that if I'm a right brainer, that I'm doomed to be stuck with a strong right brain, or if I'm a left brainer, how does that work?
So if you Google it, it'll say that left brain, right brain is a myth, which is kind of right, but it's also a myth within itself, because we've got these two hemispheres, and these two hemispheres are profoundly different. However, our brain is integrated. We've got a corpus callosum that join the two hemispheres. There have been experiences of people who've had split brain operations, and it's very interesting, the research around that, about the effect that it has where the left and right hemisphere is not communicating. But essentially, why I say the myth is a myth, because our left hemisphere is much more linear. It is much more strategic. It is much more static in its processing. Okay, and the right hemisphere is more emotive, more creative. Okay, we also process more of positive emotions in our left hemisphere. Okay, so being determined, moving forward. We process more negative emotions in our right hemisphere. If you think of creatives like artists like Van Gogh, cutting off his ear and that kind of thing, often amazing artists, or they suffer with depression, etc. So there are differences, but remember, it's integrated. There's a magnificent book called The Master and His Emissary, if you want to hear about it, and go and listen to any of Jill Bolt Taylor's talks. She suffered a brain hemorrhage in her left hemisphere, and she existed with this right hemisphere. She is fascinating, if you listen to her talks, to understand left and right brain functioning.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Barbara?
Hey, Colin, Srini here.
Hi.
Okay, so let me just let Barbara, and then I'll come to you.
Okay. I have read something somewhere about when you, especially over this COVID thing, when you're in that fight or flight mode, and you're constantly in it, and you're constantly dealing with this COVID news and everything that's going on every day, and you end up in this fight or flight mode, and then it becomes I read that it becomes kind of like a comfort zone, because you're used to that kind of panic, you're used to that kind of feeling, that it's hard to step out of that and get and think more clearly and think less conspiratorially, for that matter, and get into the more calm way of thinking. How can you navigate that with someone?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's everybody's personal journey. Some people have much more tolerance for a lot of adrenaline than other people do as well. But it's about having those conversations. How is this serving you? And then helping people have strategies for managing it, like simple things like breathing. I mean, our quick strategy to actually calm your your sympathetic nervous system immediately is to inhale deeply and to exhale longer on the exhale. If you want to calm yourself down. If you want to stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, longer inhale and shorter exhale. So simple things like that, you can actually support people. And also our coaching, I don't know, I believe coaching helps people get into a focused, empowered state. I see that happening as opposed to running around that terrified narrative that is just occupying them all the time. I see we have so little time. Abby, do you want to finish off and then I can speak to Srini, or do you want to?
Yes, we are at the top of the hour. We just left with one last minute. So I'll just share the last slide on how people can, all the participants here can apply for the CCEs. It's available in the site. I'm just going to quickly share my slide again, just in case anybody wants to know. Yes, so this is how we claim CCEs. You have to log in to the ICF education portal, click on the learning checkpoint, and you will have few questions posted from the webinar that you just attended. And once you answer them and you get a score of 100%, you can claim by clicking on the claim credit box. So this is the process, and we have an amazing newsletter now. So do register and sign up for our newsletter. And as a community, we are growing. Me and Key are very happy to have all of you who, if you're not part of our ICF Vision and Enhancement Community of Practice, do join us. And yes, Colleen, so it was an amazing session. If you want to take one last question for Srini, if we have time, we'll go ahead. But otherwise, Srini, you can drop us the question and we'll somehow try and answer that in our, Community of Practice FB page or LinkedIn page.